I was standing at the edge of the long dining table, my hands nervously gripping the linen napkin in my lap, as if it might anchor me to the moment. His mother looked me square in the eye from across the roasted lamb and seasonal vegetables. Her tone was casual, but her words sliced through the warm air like a cold knife. "Girls like you don't really fit into families like ours." The room fell silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. Conversation halted mid-sentence. My boyfriend, Michael, looked frozen, somewhere between embarrassment and disbelief. But he said nothing. I blinked once. I smiled, barely. I said nothing. Inside, though, it felt like something cracked open. I had been holding my breath all evening, trying to match their polished accents, their practiced manners, their highbrow conversation about legacy and lineage. This was my first Thanksgiving with his family, and it was clear I'd never be invited back. I reached for the wine glass with steady hands, though my palms were damp. Every instinct screamed to excuse myself, to cry in the guest bathroom, to shout back with something, anything, that would defend me. But I didn't. Instead, I whispered politely, "Excuse me," stood up and walked out of the dining room. I didn't slam the door. I didn't even let it creak. I just left with the same grace they claimed I lacked. Michael didn't follow me. That was the part that hurt most. It had started with a polite invitation. "Come join us for the holidays," Michael had said with his warm smile and hopeful eyes. "My mom's a little intense, but I think once she gets to know you, she'll really like you." He said that with such certainty, such naive optimism, that I had believed it, too. I'd spend the days leading up to the visit researching their family, the Prestons of Georgia, landowners, a legacy built on Southern charm and old money. I practiced proper table etiquette, picked out a soft blue wool dress, and brought a carefully wrapped bottle of Bordeaux from a local boutique in Savannah where I worked. But from the moment I walked through the arched mahogany doors of their estate, I knew I wasn't welcome. Michael's mother, Diane Preston, had inspected me the way someone might examine a knockoff bag. A flicker of surprise when I extended my hand instead of leaning in for a cheek kiss. A glance down at my shoes. An overly tight smile that never reached her eyes. "Emily," she repeated. How quaint. The weekend was filled with moments like that, death by 1,000 dismissals. When I offered to help in the kitchen, she said, "Oh no, dear. We don't want to confuse the caterers." When I complimented the family portraits in the hallway, she said, "Yes, all original commissions. We like to preserve history. It's in our blood." When I mentioned I grew up in a small town outside Nashville, she replied, "Charming." Michael did his best to break free from all that. Still, I smiled. Still, I tried. Even when she introduced me to her country club friends not as Michael's girlfriend, but simply as Emily from Savannah, I swallowed the shame. The breaking point, though, came that night at dinner. "She's just not a Preston woman," Diane had said, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. And then she looked at me and said the line I'll never forget. "Girls like you don't really fit into families like ours." No one stopped her. No one defended me. They all just kept chewing. After I left the table, I didn't cry in the guest room. I didn't call a friend or vent online. I just sat quietly on the small bench at the bottom of the stairs, my hands folded in my lap, staring at my reflection in the hallway mirror. And in that reflection, I didn't see shame. I saw clarity. For the first time, I wasn't questioning what I'd done wrong. I was questioning why I'd spent so long trying to prove I was enough for people who clearly didn't deserve me. Michael came up 20 minutes later. He didn't apologize. He just said, "She didn't mean it like that. She's just old-fashioned." I looked at him, stunned. "Old-fashioned?" I asked, my voice calm but cracking. "You watched her humiliate me in front of your whole family." He shrugged helplessly. "This is just how she is." I nodded slowly. "And is this how you are? The kind of man who lets the woman he loves be degraded?" He didn't answer. That silence was louder than anything his mother said. I stood up, gathered my coat, and walked out the front door. I didn't slam it. Michael didn't try to stop me. I didn't come from money. But I came from love. My family was the kind that didn't have a lot but always gave everything. My mama, Linda Carter, raised me and my younger brother while juggling two jobs, one at a local diner and the other cleaning offices downtown. My dad left when I was 8, and after that it was just us. We didn't talk about him much. Not because we hated him, but because Mama refused to let bitterness grow where peace was still possible. Every Sunday, she'd cook up a big meal, biscuits, fried chicken, collard greens, and we'd sit on the porch with chipped plates and plastic cups, laughing until the sun went down. We didn't need fancy silverware or chandeliers to feel like we belonged. We were home. But even then, I always felt this invisible gap between me and the rest of the world. At school, I wasn't the girl with the designer backpack or the latest phone. I was the one who stayed quiet during the "what are your parents doing for the holidays?" conversation. When college acceptance letters came, I didn't have a family legacy to get me through the doors, just my part-time jobs and a scholarship I'd cried over when I got. Still, I worked hard. I kept my head down, earned my nursing degree, and got a job at St. Joseph's Hospital in Savannah. I rented a modest little apartment above a bakery, and on weekends, I volunteered at a retirement home nearby. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I just wanted to help where I could. That's where I met Michael. He had brought in his grandmother, who'd had a bad fall. He was patient, soft-spoken, the kind of man who remembered to bring a real photo album instead of showing pictures on his phone. He noticed how gently I treated her, how I stayed an extra 15 minutes past my shift to help her walk to the garden. And then he noticed me. I'll never forget our first date. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a little jazz cafe tucked near the Riverwalk. He listened when I spoke, like I mattered. Like my words weren't just noise, but music. He laughed at my stories, asked about my family, my work. He made me feel seen. For the first time in a long time, I thought, maybe I don't need to change to be enough. Michael was different from anyone I'd dated before. He came from wealth, yes, but he never flaunted it. He didn't wear expensive cologne or flash his watch. He was the kind of man who read books instead of bragging about his resume. But slowly, the cracks began to show, not in him, but in the world around him. His friends would ask me things like, "So, what exactly do you do at the hospital?" "Just admin stuff." Or, "Wow, Savannah. I think I drove through there once. Isn't it kind of small?" At first, I brushed it off. But then came the family. Michael warned me that his mother could be a little sharp. But I had no idea that was code for classist, dismissive, and quietly cruel. The first time I met her, I brought a bouquet of sunflowers. She looked at them and said, "We usually do orchids." She asked if my family owned land in Tennessee. When I said no, she smiled thinly and said, "Ah, so your roots are simpler." But I kept showing up. I believed that love meant trying, that if I just stayed kind enough, respectful enough, proper enough, I'd be accepted. But with every interaction, I began to realize something deeply unsettling. I was auditioning for a role in a play I didn't even want to be in. My family never made anyone earn love. We didn't ask for resumes at the dinner table. We didn't care what car someone drove, or where they summered, or who their grandfather had voted for. We cared about who showed up when it mattered, who brought soup when you were sick, who helped with the dishes, who stayed through the hard stuff. And that was the kind of woman I had always been. So it hurt deeply when I realized that being good, generous, and grounded wasn't enough for Diane Preston. She didn't want a daughter-in-law. She wanted a mirror, someone who reflected her values, her wealth, her family's image. And the cruelest part? Michael never defended me. Not once. Not when she made comments about my accent. Not when she implied my mother probably meant well, raising me alone. Not even when she outright said I wasn't cut from the same cloth. And every time he stayed silent, I made excuses for him. He's just caught in the middle. He doesn't want to make things worse. He loves me. That's what matters. But love without protection isn't love. Love without voice isn't love. Love without courage isn't love. And I was starting to see that the only one fighting for me in that relationship was me. After that Thanksgiving dinner, things weren't the same. Not between me and Michael, and certainly not between me and his family. For days, I didn't call him. I wanted to see if he'd notice, if he'd reach out, if he'd fight for us. He didn't. Not for 5 days. When he finally did, it wasn't what I hoped for. He didn't call to say he missed me. He didn't apologize for not standing up for me. He just checked in. "Hey, Emily. You doing okay?" I wanted to say, "No, I'm not okay. Your mom humiliated me, and you said nothing." But instead, I said, "I'm fine." He sighed like he knew he'd messed up but didn't know how to fix it. "I've been thinking," he said, "maybe we should take a little space." I froze. Space. I repeated, barely believing my ears. "Just a little time to figure things out," he added quickly. I don't want things to get more complicated with my family. You know how it is." I almost laughed. "You mean you don't want to stand up to them?" He didn't respond. That silence again. I remember sitting there in my tiny kitchen, my tea gone cold, the December air seeping through the window cracks. I stared at the wall, my heart racing not from heartbreak, but from clarity. This wasn't love. This was convenience. I was easy to love as long as I didn't make things hard for him. As long as I didn't expect too much. As long as I didn't need defending. I wanted to hang up, to tell him we were done. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I said, "Take all the space you want, Michael." Then I ended the call. I cried that night. Not because I missed him, but because I missed the me I'd silenced to be accepted. The girl who once believed that kindness would always be enough. A week later, I got a message from a mutual friend, a girl named Claire who had known Michael since college. She'd always been kind to me, always warm. Her text was short. "Hey, just thought you should know. Michael brought someone new to the Christmas party. His mom introduced her as a better fit." I didn't reply right away. I just sat with that. A better fit. That phrase repeated in my head over and over. They didn't just replace me, they advertised it. And suddenly, the silence made sense. The space wasn't a pause. It was a replacement plan. They had already decided. I had been dismissed. Quietly. Without confrontation. Without closure. Claire sent another message a few minutes later. "I'm so sorry. It's messed up. You deserve better." I turned off my phone. I walked into the bathroom and stared at my reflection. Not to cry, not to pity myself, but to look at the woman who had given everything to people who didn't even value the gift. And I said to her, softly, "Never again." There's a kind of power in silence, not the silence of fear, but the silence of choice. After that Christmas party, I didn't call Michael. I didn't respond to Claire's texts. I didn't ask questions, and I didn't beg for answers. I just vanished. I deleted his number, blocked him on social media, took down every photo of us from my walls, my phone, and my memories. It was the first time in my life I chose me over being understood. No explanations. No drama. Just done. I stopped checking my phone, stopped rehearsing comebacks in the shower, stopped thinking about how I could have made his mother like me more. I stopped wondering what I lacked, because I finally understood the truth. I didn't lack anything. They lacked vision. They lacked heart. So I pulled back from everything tied to that world. The charity events, the social gatherings, the whispered judgments in silk and pearls. I went back to my own world, the one that had always made me feel whole. Sunday mornings with Mama at the diner. Movie nights with my brother, Caleb, who always brought cheap popcorn and big opinions. Long shifts at the hospital where patients called me Angel just for listening. And I did something I hadn't done in years. I started writing again. Poetry mostly. Sometimes just one line. Sometimes a full page. But every word felt like a thread pulling me back to myself. I took a trip to Asheville alone. Hiked the Blue Ridge Mountains, stayed in a cabin with no Wi-Fi, and cried on the porch as the sunrise broke through clouds. Not from sadness, but release. For the first time, I wasn't rushing to prove my worth to anyone. I was being. I even started a small side project, a wellness group for young nurses struggling with burnout. Nothing fancy. Just a weekly meetup with tea, space to breathe, and honesty. It felt good to create something that wasn't about performance but about healing. Meanwhile, Diane and Michael? I heard things. Through whispers. Through mutual acquaintances. Apparently, the better fit had some opinions of her own, ones that didn't sit quite right with the Prestons. Apparently, she wasn't into family brunches or smiling politely when Diane insulted the help. Apparently, Michael looked tired. But I didn't care. Not in the bitter way. In the healed way. The kind of way that comes when you realize the door you were banging on led to a room that would have caged you. And now, I had Sky. One day, months later, I received a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to.
It was Diane.
Her voice was careful, as if every syllable was being weighed. She said, "Emily, I heard about the support group you started. A friend of mine, her daughter's a nurse. She said it's been life-changing." I waited, silent. Then she added slowly, "You always had a quiet strength."
I just didn't see it then.
I didn't respond. Not out of anger, but because I didn't need anything from her anymore. Finally, she said something that made the air go still. "I'm sorry if I ever made you feel less. It wasn't fair." Still, I said nothing. Because the most powerful thing I've ever learned is that closure isn't something they give you, it's something you give yourself. Before she hung up, she said, "I hope you're doing well, ma'am." It almost made me laugh. Not because I needed to hear it, but because the girl who once begged for her respect now stood tall enough that even Diane Preston had to look up to speak. The shift didn't come from Michael. Not from Diane either. It came from someone completely unexpected, a man named Dr. Nathaniel Brooks. He was a retired cardiologist, well-respected in Savannah, the kind of man who made eye contact with everyone from CEOs to janitors, and actually meant it when he asked how your day was going. He had a soft voice, and eyes that saw things most people missed. One Thursday afternoon, I was in the hospital cafeteria grabbing tea after my shift when he walked up to me. I hadn't seen him in months. He used to volunteer at the hospital before his stroke, and came in sometimes for rehab checkups. He looked better, stronger. And when he saw me, he smiled and said, "There she is, the woman who saved my life." I laughed, waving him off. "I just gave you a sandwich and made sure the nurse knew you didn't like IVs on your left side." He chuckled. "No, Emily. You listened. You didn't treat me like a chart or a diagnosis. You treated me like a man. That kind of care saves people in ways medicine can't." I felt the lump rise in my throat, that strange ache when someone sees you clearly after you've spent so long being invisible. We sat for a while, sipping tea, and at one point, he said something that stopped me cold. "You know, Diane Preston spoke at my retirement event last year." My grip on the cup tightened slightly. He noticed. She went on about her son's bright future. About the kind of woman he'd need by his side. Polished, proper, presentable.
He paused.
I asked her if she meant you. She said no. She said you were common. I didn't say anything. I'd heard worse. But then, he leaned in and said, "I told her she was blind." My eyes widened. I told her, "That girl's not common. She's just unshakable in a world that only respects noise." He sat back and added, "She didn't like it, but she listened." Later that week, a nurse told me someone posted about me in the Savannah Healthcare Heroes Facebook group. I found the post. It was from Dr. Brooks' niece, Hannah. She'd written, "My uncle said a nurse named Emily Carter reminded him why people matter more than politics. If anyone knows her, thank her. She's why he still believes in grace." I wasn't tagged. I wasn't mentioned by title. But I didn't need to be. People knew.
People saw.
One comment read, "I think that's the same Emily who runs the nurse wellness group. She's amazing." Another, "She helped me when I was panicking after a shift last month."
Didn't even know her name then.
Just her kindness. And just like that, in the places where real hearts lived, not behind gated driveways or family name plaques, I was known. Not for fitting in, but for standing out in a way that mattered. A few weeks later, my aunt called me. She lived on the other side of town and had bumped into Diane Preston at a charity gala. Apparently, Diane was talking about how the healthcare system could use more compassionate women like Emily Carter. My aunt nearly dropped her wine glass. You mean the girl you said wasn't a fit for your son? She asked, deadpan. Diane had turned beet red, apparently. Well, people change, she muttered. But I hadn't changed. They had finally seen what was always there. It started with a text.
Simple.
Polite. Sterile. Hi Emily, this is Michael. Just checking in. Hope you're doing well. After 6 months of silence, that's what he sent. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just a soft tap on the door of a house he once helped burn down. I didn't reply. 2 days later, another message came, this time from a number I didn't recognize. Emily, it's Diane. I'd love to speak with you if you're open to it. Open to what? She'd made her opinion loud and clear that day in her chandelier-lit foyer, right before telling me I wasn't the kind of woman Michael needs by his side. But I didn't respond to her either. I wasn't playing that game anymore. Then came the email. Subject: Reconnecting. From Claire, Michael's sister. Emily. I think a lot of things were misunderstood, and honestly, everyone's grown a lot since then. You were never the problem. Maybe we all just didn't know how to handle someone so different in a good way. Diane has asked about you several times. We all have. I think we owe it to each other to have a conversation. No tension. Just grown-ups clearing the air. Let me know if you're open to meeting. Coffee on me. Best.
Claire.
I stared at that line. You were never the problem. Funny how it always takes a public shift in perception for people to suddenly remember your worth. It wasn't me that had changed. It was the optics. Now that their circles were whispering my name in praise, now that Dr. Brooks had credited me publicly, now that people saw value in who I was, they wanted back in. But I could read between the lines. This wasn't about reconciliation. This was damage control. They wanted to rewrite the story, not because they were sorry, but because they didn't want to be seen as the villains in it. I didn't respond to the email. The next week, I ran into Claire at a local farmer's market. She looked surprised but composed, ever the PR darling of the family. She walked up with her lavender latte and said, "You look great, Emily." Seriously, like radiant. I smiled. "Thanks. Hope you're doing well." She nodded, then added with a soft chuckle, "You know, we've all been talking. And Mom's actually been kind of obsessed with your nurse group. She keeps saying how proud she is of you."
Can you believe that?
I didn't answer. She pushed gently. "Maybe it's time, you know? To reset. Water under the bridge and all that." That's when I looked her in the eye and said, "What you all did wasn't water. It was gasoline. And I was the one left burning." She blinked. Swallowed. I smiled gently. But I learned how to rise through fire. And now, I don't go back to people who lit the match. There was no anger in my voice. Just truth. Claire tried to laugh it off. "God, you've always had a way with words. You should write a book or something." I shrugged. "Maybe I will. Just not one you'll be featured in kindly." We parted ways in silence. I could feel her watching me as I walked away, not with scorn or superiority, but with something foreign to people like them. Regret. Not because they lost me, but because they finally realized they never deserved me in the first place. It was a Sunday afternoon. The sun filtered through my window, and for once, the house was completely silent. No beeping machines, no hospital pages, no Diane's voice echoing in my head. Just peace. And then my phone vibrated with a notification. A voicemail. From an unknown number. I almost deleted it without listening, assuming it was another marketer. Or worse, another subtle attempt from someone in the Preston orbit trying to accidentally reconnect. But something nudged me. I hit play. "Hi Emily, you may not remember me, but my name is Sarah Brooks. I'm Dr. Nathaniel Brooks' granddaughter." I froze. "My grandfather talks about you more than he talks about golf. That's saying something." She laughed softly, nervously. "I wanted to reach out because last week he gave me a letter. Said it was important I read it to you, because he doesn't trust himself not to cry if he did it in person." A rustle of paper. "Here goes." She paused, then began reading, slowly, carefully, like each word weighed more than the last. "Dear Emily, you saved more than my heart the day you sat with me during my worst hour. You reminded me that kindness isn't a performance. It's a choice. One that you make quietly, without applause. And that kind of kindness is holy. I held my breath. I've seen the way others have looked at you, like you're something to be tolerated instead of celebrated. They didn't know they were standing in the presence of grace. My hand trembled as I reached for a tissue. Diane and her circle, they speak of class, reputation, perfection. But they have no idea what real nobility looks like. I do. I saw it in you. Every time you showed up, not because it was your job, but because it was who you are. The letter continued, but I barely heard the rest. Because in that moment, I felt it. Not just the words, but the recognition. The kind that wasn't performative. The kind that saw me. Not the Emily they painted in judgment. Not the Emily they rejected. But the real Emily. The one who had survived in silence. And finally was seen. Thank you for giving me hope again. For reminding me that angels walk in scrubs and speak with southern twangs. NB. Sarah's voice came back. I don't know what happened with Michael's family, but I hope you know, my grandfather believes you're the kind of woman who changes lives. Including his.
Click.
The message ended. I sat there for a long time, phone still in hand, heart stretched wide open. Not because someone praised me, but because someone finally understood me. And it didn't come with strings, or judgment, or performance. It came with truth. That night, I pinned the voicemail transcription on my corkboard above my desk, right next to a picture of my younger self in scrubs, looking exhausted but proud. A reminder of the circle that kindness travels. That what you give in quiet corners eventually finds its way back, not always through the people you hoped, but always through the people who matter. It happened on a Wednesday. I was home early from the clinic, the clouds outside hanging heavy like they, too, were carrying things unspoken. I just made myself a cup of peppermint tea and sat down to finally journal when I heard it. A knock. Not a delivery knock. Not a neighbor's knock. A deliberate knock. I froze for a moment, then slowly stood up. My feet moved on instinct, but my heart already knew. When I opened the door, there she was. Diane Preston. Perfectly pressed slacks. Designer bag slung over her shoulder. That carefully calculated expression, one foot between apology and superiority. She didn't smile.
Not yet.
Instead, she tilted her head. Emily, she said like it was still unfamiliar to say my name kindly. Hi. I replied, calm but firm. There was a long pause, a dance of silence. Then, I was in the neighborhood. I almost laughed. Savannah was a small town, yes, but this neighborhood was very out of her way. She didn't wait for a response. Just stepped forward a little. I just thought it might be nice to talk.
Clear the air.
Maybe go for coffee or something. She glanced down at her manicured hands. Her voice softened, just enough to sound human. I realized things were said. Things that came out wrong. There it was. The apology wrapped in passive language. No ownership. No naming. Just vague phrases floating in the space between us. It wasn't easy, you know. Letting Michael go. Watching him walk away from what we'd built. She paused. From what we expected. I nodded once. I understand expectations. I lived under them for a long time. She looked up at me again, and this time, her eyes shimmered, not with crocodile tears, but the weight of her loss. Not of me, of control. Diane cleared her throat. Michael's not the same. He's quieter now. He doesn't bring anyone home anymore. I think he misses what you brought into his life. I didn't respond. I didn't owe her comfort. She took a step forward again. Maybe it's time to move past all that. We're older, wiser. I'm sure we could. I raised my hand gently, and with a soft, unwavering voice, I said, no. That one word stopped her mid-breath. She blinked. I'm sorry.
No, Diane.
We're not going to pretend like none of it happened. I'm not going to give you the illusion of reconciliation just to make everyone more comfortable. She swallowed. I'm not angry, I added. I'm just done. With performing. With shrinking. With asking to be seen. A breeze moved through the trees behind her, almost in agreement. You had your chance to know me, the real me, but you chose your pride over connection, your image over humanity. I looked at her, not with bitterness, but clarity. And now I don't need you to understand me. I've built a life that does. Silence again. Diane's posture stiffened, the old pride returning to shield her vulnerability. She clutched her bag tighter. Well, I suppose that's your decision. I smiled kindly.
Yes.
It is. And with that, I slowly closed the door. Not with a slam, not with a speech, just a quiet ending. A final no, because not all closure needs conflict. Sometimes it just needs peace, and the strength to no longer need the apology that never truly comes. I used to think that if I could just do enough, be enough, give enough, they'd see me. I thought love was something you earned by blending in, by becoming smaller, quieter, more palatable. I believed if I said all the right things, wore the right clothes, never pushed back too hard, I could find a place in a world that was clearly built without me in mind. But here's the truth I had to learn the hard way. You can be everything someone asks for, and still never be enough for people committed to misunderstanding you. You can bend until you break. You can bleed grace, and still be told you're too much. You can sacrifice everything and still be called ungrateful. But that doesn't mean you're the problem. It means it's time to stop knocking on doors that only open when you're pretending to be someone you're not. I used to grieve the family I never had, the warm welcome I never received, the moment I thought would come when she would finally say, "You belong here."
Now?
I realize I don't need to belong there, because I belong here, in this quiet, beautiful life I built out of the ruins, surrounded by truth, loved by people who see me, respected by strangers who never asked me to shrink. So if you're reading this or watching this, and you know what it feels like to be on the outside, to sit silently at tables where your presence is barely tolerated, let me tell you something I wish someone had told me a long time ago. You are not too much. You're just too real for people who pretend. You don't need to audition for love. You don't need to wear pain like armor. And you certainly don't need to chase the approval of people who only love versions of you that don't even exist. Sometimes the greatest freedom is not being invited. Sometimes the most powerful thing you'll ever do is say, no, not out of bitterness, but out of peace. Because healing doesn't always come from reconciliation. Sometimes it comes from release. Let them talk. Let them twist the story. You don't have to correct them anymore. Your life, your joy, your quiet, grounded strength, that's your vindication. And one day, just like Diane, they'll call you ma'am without realizing it's not respect they're giving. It's recognition.